Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of NEO CRE. I am pleased to introduce Matthew Schneider, the CEO of Building Inc. Matthew, could you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background and also why you started Building Inc.?
Sure. Well, Isabel, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation that we have and truly presenting the NEO, the new form of commercial real estate, because I think tokenization is the future. So this is going to be, I think, insightful and unique. A lot of people are going to be hearing about some of the tech for the first time, so I'll try to keep it pretty simple while also giving some alpha, as they say. My background was for a while, it was just trading the market. I thought I was going to make a living out of that. I was looking at small cap equities and derivatives. Trading, not doing a whole lot of investing for the long term. And so the short-sightedness got the better of me eventually. And I needed to switch markets. And this was maybe 5 years ago now that I made that transition into commercial real estate, looking at it as a market, but then also as an industry. So what's going on? How are we building stuff? How does it get turned into an investment? And I really got to sink my teeth in and explore what's happening in construction, what's happening in syndication, how is money moving, and what's the truth behind our city skylines? Because that's how a lot of people perceive it. They know that these are buildings that we work, live, and play in, but they don't know the inner workings. And as I got exposed to the inner workings, I saw all of these problems that were pertinent and unsolved for like the past 100 years. It's so full of outdated processes and legacy systems. And I think it's interesting because you have a clash of the newest technology, blockchain and artificial intelligence, that's being applied to the world's oldest and least productive industry in many ways. But it's been fruitful for me over the past 5 years as I made that transition and figuring out how can I use my skills in capital markets. And I also published a book at one point, so decent when it comes to formulating thoughts and communication. How can I use this in my entrepreneurial drive to start something, to solve problems, and make the world a little bit better of a place along the way? And that was the evolution into building, which is now addressing a lot of the data gaps. So the asymmetry or lack of opacity in real estate, which causes all sorts of issues. And then more on the capital side of things. How can we get money to flow better, but how can we also protect investor interests and just give a little bit more confidence to real estate as an investment class? You know, if anyone's been in commercial real estate, they know that it's gone through some troubles in the past few years, and that's true wherever you are in the world. So now more than ever, it's a good time to be building something and addressing these market and industry inefficiencies.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that answer so much, especially being mission oriented with that and really redesigning what is the commercial real estate industry. So thank you for that background. So we can go ahead and jump right in. How would you explain real estate tokenization to a commercial real estate professional that's unfamiliar with blockchain?
Well, if they're unfamiliar, I tend to not be the first to want to familiarize them with blockchain and tokenization. I always like to separate the technology from some of its deliverables, and that puts my customer segments into two categories. We have folks who want maybe better portfolio management, more efficiency, and they need to attract capital, and that's the end of the story. And I have to completely tailor my pitch differently than if someone actually comes to me and says, I read about tokenization and I want to tokenize my assets. So it's just two different conversations. I in some ways, it's very difficult to explain blockchain and decentralized ledgers and Web3 to someone who has no idea what that is. And we can plant the seed, but I think people have to come to the conclusion on their own, or else just focus on the deliverables, as a service provider. Like, this is what we can offer to you. This is how we can help you. Now, for those who are taking the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the technology, I guess starting with blockchain itself, it's sort of an evolution of the internet as we know it. We know that things are becoming more digital, but that has also come with centralization. You think about Amazon. Amazon controls a lot of your data. You think about Facebook, where you're posting, you're uploading stuff. They own and control a lot of your data. Well, the same thing is true even in real estate, where you start to digitize. Someone's going to control your data at some point, and that's not always a good thing.
Mhm.
So the Web3 community sort of emerged and said, well, as things go digital, what if the people uploading data, handling assets retained ownership? And this is the foundational principle for blockchain. It's a counter counteract to the centralization that's happening as things go online. And it's allowing for decentralization, more control over the assets that we have, the data that we have, the identities that we have. So philosophically, that's blockchain. As a technology, it really functions as a ledger. So ledgers record transactions. They record that there's people involved, that something has moved, and we want that transaction to be trusted without a third party or a centralized entity having to tell us what's true and what's not. And blockchain was a technology that allowed for that. Peer to peer is what they'd call it. And the best example is Bitcoin. Either you can rely on a centralized entity like a bank and all of its partners that are going to help you move money, or you and I could just move money on our own, and it could be trustless and it wouldn't go wrong. And that's what blockchain enabled. So you might be thinking, well, how does this apply to capital markets or real estate? Well, transactions are happening every single day, all the time. We're moving information, documents, we're conducting transactions, whether it's of money or equity and other financial instruments. So what if there was a better way to take control over the transactions that we're conducting? And so now you're applying the principles of blockchain and decentralization and actually putting them into effect. What if I can invest without needing a bunch of intermediaries who each take their cut? What if I could trade or move money without that same thing happening? Because there's always parties that step in and take a little bit. And so we can retain value and have more control over what we have just by using this decentralized technology. And the instance of tokenization is a big fancy word. You could actually replace that with blockchained with like a apostrophe D. It just means that we're taking a lot of those traditional transactions and using a blockchain to conduct them. First, we went from paper to digital, like PDFs, and then we can go from PDFs to a blockchain. It's just a new, better way to record these transactions because, again, it's a ledger and it's a notary. So we're recording these transactions with confidence and realizing all sorts of benefits in doing so. It's become a bit of a hot topic recently, especially in banking. If you look at how much banking or real estate is held up by what do they call it? Pop sticks and popsicle sticks and bubble gum. Like everything is just tied together with shoestring. You realize, wow, there's so many parties. There's so much miscommunication and problems with transparency. Everyone's on different pages. We're using siloed systems. How do we all get on the same page and just have more trust in our systems? And blockchain is offering that. And it goes back to why building was founded. I realized there's big issues with data and transparency in real estate. We can work to resolve that. And if we do, it just makes things so much better at a fundamental level, better real estate, better projects, better investments. And then as there's all sorts of ripple effects that come out of that, faster transactions, more liquidity, more money in our pockets. So that's the long-winded answer to tokenization. I think the TLDR is it's just a better digital format for moving value.
100%. I totally agree. And we touched on the benefits a lot. And I also wanted to know, what are the critical gaps in traditional real estate markets that tokenization most effectively addresses, whether that's liquidity problems or administrative efficiencies? Could you go ahead and talk about that?
So this is where my perspective starts to get a little bit unique. You can go online and you can Google how is blockchain being used, and some people will mention fractional ownership, and I don't think that's actually any sort of outcome related to blockchain, because I could raise money right now for a project. I could slice it into 2,000 pieces using the laws created by the US government, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and that's fractional ownership. And blockchain didn't offer that. And same thing with liquidity. You have to understand, well, what is liquidity? It's how easily I can convert something to cash. Well, who gives me the cash? A buyer. I want to sell something, and a buyer steps in and says, here's cash. And that's liquidity in action. And the problem with saying that blockchains create liquidity is that they right now don't. You can tokenize something or blockchain it, and if there aren't buyers on the other end, then now I'm holding this digital ownership of something and no one's buying it. Because they're trying to figure out, well, first I have to get a wallet, and what's Web3? How do I even find the deal? And sometimes it creates less liquidity. So for me, I focus on the administrative portion of things, the back office. And this sometimes makes my pitch a little less interesting, because I can't say, hey, we're going to tokenize the moon and everyone's going to buy into it and we're going to be trading it. It's going to be like the stock market. Like, that's super visionary and thrilling, and it's never worked. Instead, I say, what are some enterprise uses of the technology? Well, let's go back to the basics. Right now, there's a big issue where we're all looking at different information, and this causes rework, miscommunication, fraud, manipulation, or it slows down deals. What if we had a way to be looking at the same information and come to trust it? Insert blockchain right there. It's a back office use where you might have 10 different people, 10 different companies trying to analyze something for a real estate deal, and now we can be on the same page. It's a simple fix. Or I should say it's an easy fix. It's a little bit more difficult to actually roll out and practice, but logically it makes sense. And for folks who handle real estate, they know that, hey, all the stuff going on in the back office, and when you get the auditors and the accountants and the attorneys and things slow down and you still have interest rates applied, money is being spent, we have problems. It is actually a big problem to fix, because it's costly. Time is money. So what if we can get people on the same page and save that time while we're saving money? And I thought that's a really practical use case for the technology, and it's administrative. Then on the tokenization side of things, I don't know if we want to dive into what smart contracts are. And it's a funny name, smart contract, because right now they're not smart and they're not contracts. You think like contracts are legally binding and smart is intelligent in some way. And it's not quite there, but there's one word that underpins what a smart contract is trying to do, and it's programmability. The ability to program, if this happens, then that. And in a transaction, we can say, if these boxes are checked, then proceed with the transaction. And that makes life a whole lot easier, especially in a digital age. I can upload information, I can prepare a deal, done, and the deal moves forward. That's again, saves us time and money. And so combined, I think this is really about streamlining things, streamlining deals and responsibilities that usually take too much time.
Exactly. Yeah. And with that answer, I like that you touched on the enterprise issues, because I feel like that's the root of where the problems arise from. But you did talk about the centralization to decentralization. And so I want to switch over to Building Inc. How do you guys emphasize data integrity as a prerequisite? And how does your platform ensure this data accuracy throughout an asset's lifecycle?
Yeah, that's a big portion of what we do. So data is the new oil. Those who capture it and refine it can become very powerful. But there's still good and bad data, and this is one of the things that we're helping. Another figure of speech that people say is there's a lot of noise when it comes to data. How do we clean that? How do we find the signal and what's actually valuable in that data? So first things first, looking at the building platform, our flagship product is a data room. And you think, well, that's not very fancy. But one of the elements to this is, if you're using a data repository, I'll name a few companies, SharePoint, S3 through AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Drive, Box, you're holding and housing your data somewhere. We can connect to that. So you stay in ownership of it, but now we're connecting to it. We're aligning all the stakeholders. Everyone can peek inside. They can perform their due diligence. The first thing that we do to add more veracity to the data is validating it. So how do we validate it? Well, everything that comes in gets a digital fingerprint, not just any sort of digital fingerprint, but something that's based on a blockchain. One of the things that I didn't mention about blockchains is how they're immutable. I can't modify that. I can't change an entry. I can only add to it. And so we have sort of this track record or this change log that comes with the blockchain. Well, as documents are moving into the data room and I'm uploading critical information, it could be certain licenses and permits, an appraisal that was performed. This is all getting logged. And what this offers is what we call auditability, or the ability to perform an audit. And this is how you start to build confidence in the data and documents that has been uploaded. Then we take it a step further. You're going to use the data somewhere. Maybe it's in a waterfall calculation or the actual appraisal model that you used. We have all sorts of numbers, all sorts of calculations and outputs. But the big question is how did you arrive at this conclusion? Let's trace it back. I can click on any of that, brings me back to the source document, and that source document, again, has that digital fingerprint. And now you have this streamlined workflow for reviewing and verifying potentially thousands of data points back to their source document. Now, there's still one caveat, which is that as a company, we can't guarantee that the document you upload or that a client uploads is 100% authentic. However, there are professionals in the industry that do that, and we've made it very easy for them to step in and perform that audit because they can say, well, here's the source document. Let me inspect that. Let me compare that to the registry that the city has. Or here's a calculation, say I'm performing an appraisal. I can track it back. I can see, okay, this is what they're claiming they're using to calculate this. Let me compare this to other stuff in the market. So it's not necessarily about completely replacing the trust system, but streamlining how that can be done. Because again, that's where the real cost is incurred. It's when people have to comb through information and they do that over and over again. Hey, can you send me the latest version of that? Or you're on WhatsApp, you're on email. Can you send this over? Is this the best version? Why does this look different than the last time I had it? Is that on John Smith's computer? How do I access that? And you're just doing this back and forth. No. Let's get into one place. Let's see that the information has been verified and then add some context. Who, what, where, why, how, when. What's the reason that this document is here, and make sense of that. And it's a very valuable tool for transparency.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, data, it's a new oil, it's a new gold. And trash in, trash out. So if you have trash data, you're going to get a trash result. And a lot of the files, they're not in a centralized database. So that's great that you're solving those root issues. Switching over to regulatory frameworks, how is Building Inc. navigating these different frameworks that are fragmented?
Well, it's an interesting topic. I just moderated 2 panels yesterday, gave a keynote, and then spoke on a panel. And one of the reoccurring themes was that the regulation remains fragmented. And unfortunately, as technology service providers, we can't necessarily fix this. We have to advocate for resolutions. So you could break down the regulatory frameworks into state level, up to federal, and then what are different countries doing and how does that compare? There's always going to be a little bit of there's going to be differences between jurisdictions because we each want to rule differently, and this can cause a little bit of problem on the investment and technology side of things. For example, the EU has specific rules about how data can be handled. This is GDPR. They also have specific rules about who can invest into a deal, whether it's tokenized or not. You go to the UAE, they have their own laws around this. You go to the US, you separate it from Canada, and there's similarities, but not too much. Don't get caught in that, right? Or you face penalties. And so you just have this crazy game that we're all playing to try to understand the regulations, and then to the best of our ability build it into the technology. We can say, hey, technology is making our life easier, and then you cross state lines and suddenly the technology doesn't apply or gets something wrong and there's penalties for that. So shaping the regulatory framework has been um, challenging. I mean, we're all dealing with outdated laws and, quite frankly, outdated lawmakers who don't understand a lot of this stuff. And one of the major solutions, whether it's organizations like Stand with Crypto or the Digital Chambers, we just advocate for new bills that, at least US speaking, that promote the use of technology in new places, whether it's for handling data, for handling investments, or um, anything in between. I wish there was an example that came to mind. Well, I guess not all tokens are investments, right? This is a good example where it's sort of data, it's sort of utility, it's sort of crypto in some sense. Um, but we're saying stop treating it like an investment. Utility tokens are their own thing, right?
Mhm.
So there is some gray area there. I'm glad I found an example, but it's all over the place, and we're just doing our best to work with it.
Exactly. Yeah. But moving over to Building's approach, how do you guys differ from competitors focusing solely on digitizing existing properties?
I think when tokenization hits real estate at scale, it's going to start with the debt
Mhm.
because it's the safer investments tranche. Um, that said, it's the equity that you want to unlock because equity is just sitting there. Debt is a little bit more mobile. Someone's being paid. But I think if anything's going to be tokenized, and tokenization introduces just a fragment of risk further, and so you want to counteract that risk by using a financial instrument that is less risky. Versus if you just tokenize equity, you're just stacking risk on top of risk, and it can be a bit of turmoil. So I think that's really exciting. And one of our partners, Invenium Capital Partners, they've tokenized a lot of private credit. I mean, we're talking tens of
Yeah.
billions of dollars
Jeez.
for that very reason. You want to start with the less risky financial instrument. So when it
Yeah.
comes to differentiation, I guess it depends on who you're comparing us to. We're not necessarily a tokenization service provider. We have that capability as of recently, just to become more vertically integrated. But there's really great companies out there, Tokenizonics, Block Square, DigiShares, companies that have been doing this for a while. It's a little bit more of a commodity than it was a few years ago. Companies and firms have figured out that creating the smart contract or the token, right? So the version of the equity or debt that's going to move on the blockchain or live on the blockchain. Well, it's not that difficult. It's just programming.
Mhm.
The real challenge tends to be in the bridge between this new digital asset that you've created and the physical asset. And that bridge, again, is really difficult to solve because I mean, there's so many questions and there's so much infrastructure that has to be built up to make that happen. You don't magically make a leap from siloed systems and PDFs sitting in someone's hard drive somewhere and all that type of stuff to everything working perfectly and seamlessly on a blockchain. You have to start organizing the data. You have to make sure it's clean. You have to make sure it's verified and trustworthy. You have to protect people's privacy and intellectual property. You have to start producing those valuations. You also have to ask, how often can we produce those valuations? If you just do it once every 7 years, well, why even digitize it? The purpose of the internet is so that we can move at the speed of the internet, not at the rate of traditional real estate where you might appraise something every 5 years and transact every seven. That's not the speed of the internet. That's the speed of snail mail, right? I mean, literally, right? Getting checks in the mail and it's like, oh, okay, cool, I've got a dividend. So there's just all that digitization process, and I always say that digitization precedes tokenization. So going back to how are we differentiating? Well, I take the emphasis off of tokenization and I put the emphasis on digitization. I believe to create good tokenized real estate, you just need to create good real estate in the first place.
Mhm.
What's good real estate? It's going to have operational efficiency. It's going to have transparency. There's going to be clean and organized and digitized back office. So building is focusing on those solutions, which makes us a bit more of a prop tech company as opposed to a Web3 or deep tech or blockchain, whatever vertical you want to put us in. But it's still very important to us because we know with great confidence, especially with recent headlines, everything's going to be tokenized. We
Yeah.
know this is the future. So, in a
Yeah.
sense, we're future proofing our clients by including tokenization technology. But we're also appealing to the real problems that they have, which is getting from 0 to 1. You can't just go to 100. Tokenization is 100. You have to
Yeah.
get to 0 to 1 first. And that's the approach that we take, which means going back to who do you want to compare us to? You could compare us to maybe more traditional data management platforms. Like I can upload my data. Well, we don't actually compete with those because we encourage you to use that. Hold your data where you want it. Put it on your servers. Put it in an S3 bucket. Put it in Azure. Hold on to it. We're going to be a layer on top of that.
Mhm.
So we're not competing with the data repositories. We're not competing with the tokenization service providers. Who are we really competing with? Well, I can't say there's direct competitors yet. And that's a good thing to have. Like we're a one of one category. It's a really unique service to be able to organize that data, use artificial intelligence to extract key points, use blockchain to audit information, uh, tokenize it if you want. I'm curious to see what other solutions evolve. We know that we can't take on the world, and I'm looking forward to collaborating with them. I know that there's some companies out there that have similar ambitions. Where they're at in the product journey, it seems to be a little bit early.
Yeah.
More ideas on napkins, but if we can help them out and work together, and they present a unique solution that we're not tackling, then I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, that is awesome. But you talked about AI and blockchain, and I wanted to know within the next 5 to 10 years, how do you see these two technologies converging to further disrupt real estate investment models?
Ooh, we'll start with 5 years. It's hard to say what's going to happen in 10 years,
Right.
but in 5 years, I think there's a clear path forward. So first, blockchain is going to be used in two capabilities. First is the back office stuff, using it to verify documents. And this is what's often overlooked. Like you can just use it as a ledger and give digital fingerprints to documents. I think that's going to become more critical, especially as data and documentation scales. As you digitize stuff, there's too much noise. We need signal in the noise. We need context, metadata, and verification so that when there's 15 different parties involved on a project and we're all looking at something, we can say, well, here's the change log. So and so made modifications. Here's the proof. We know if anything was updated. And that's also going to be important because of a certain technicality that blockchains have. It's called zero knowledge proof. We're not going to dive into it too much, but from the name, zero knowledge, I know nothing about this, but there's still proof that it exists. And you think, well, why would I want to use that? If you look at where real estate sits in the private markets. Private markets are private, they have privacy. And they're that way because sometimes when you keep your secrets, you gain a competitive edge, right? My competitor doesn't know what I'm doing. I have intellectual property. So suddenly you're telling me, well, blockchains are going to make everything transparent. That I don't want to be on a blockchain then. It sounds like all my secrets are going to be given away. But
Exactly.
blockchains have a capability where we can store this data offline, we can verify it, and the world can see the verification while still having zero knowledge of what that information is. And if we're using all these inputs, leases and market performance and asset health, critical information to form a valuation, we want to trust that valuation and see that 1,000 verifications occurred to create that valuation without necessarily revealing to the outside world everything within. And that's a really cool way to trust the numbers and trust the outputs without having to see everything that goes into it.
Mhm.
On the contrary, what's an example of not doing this? A public company. I
Mhm.
can look at everything about Apple or Tesla because it's publicly traded, but not everyone wants that level of transparency. So they resort to private markets instead. So I think blockchains are going to be really prominent in protecting privacy while giving us the power of public markets
Yeah.
through that verification process. Then there's the tokenization. So that's the power of public markets portion of that, which is maybe more transactions, more trading, a little bit more liquidity.
Yeah.
Uh, Democratization, right? Power to the people, where we can use certain government structures where um, the government or the governance is sort of programmed, where we can all vote on something, we can make decisions and have our fair share.
Mhm.
Um, then the artificial intelligence. This is where it really gets a bit. What would be the right word? Science fiction. I think it we already know that artificial intelligence through, say, ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini, these language models have radically changed the world. The way that we're communicating, the way that we're posting online, the way that we're dissecting, ingesting and dissecting information, it's crazy. Um, so you start doing that, you start applying that to investment deals and pitch decks, how we put together information, how we start to manipulate information. Artificial intelligence and language models are reshaping that. Then there's other instances, generative AI. Like, is this a real identity? Is this a real document or image? Is this a real pitch deck or investment memorandum? There's a lot of things to be concerned about there, but it can also be very useful. Then there's machine learning. So if you take away all the science fiction stuff, what have computers been doing for the past 60 years? A lot of machine learning. I give it some numbers, I give it some graphs. It says, well, here's a trend, and therefore I think the trend is going to continue into the future. That's machine learning. It learns a trend and it spits out a prediction. That's going to be used a lot in financial projections and creating more coherent markets in economics and tradability. Right? If I'm going to start trading an investment, it's because I'm predicting that it's going to go down or another one is going to go up. So machine learning and the influence of trends is going to change how we set up our portfolios, I think. There's also just computers are really good at processing millions and millions of data points.
Mhm.
So there's so much information out there. There's so many things that I could be invested into. How do I determine what's the best for me? How do I go through all of their private placement memorandums, which are 100-page documents? Well, an artificial intelligence tool could go through all that and extract key information and say, here's the best ROI, here's the best risk when factoring that into the return, and so therefore based off of your portfolio expectations or what you want to accomplish, conservative growth or more aggressive, this is the best opportunity for you. So and then we didn't, I don't know if we want to get into AI agents. That's its own thing
Yeah.
where it's essentially replicating people, right? So I have an AI agent that's performing a task for me. It's trading for me. It has its own autonomy and authorization to conduct actions on my behalf. So it
Mhm.
could hire and fire people. It can take me out of a position if something if a trend isn't looking too great. And then buy, not just take me out of a position, but buy another investment to make up for it. Like, I think it's very crazy, but the good news is that we're further away than people think. We're going to have time to learn about the technologies. And the reason why we're further away than people think is it goes back to the data.
Mhm.
Artificial intelligence has to ingest good data. It has to understand that data. It needs parameters in place. Like, you can't just throw data at it. This is the misconception that people are getting from ChatGPT. They don't realize that quadrillions of data points have been fed into this, and billions of dollars have been fed into this to give you the most simple, like, word answers, like a coherent sentence. Like, that took decades of understanding how computers work, and neural networks, and the algorithms, to then rearrange everything, and have go through the what are they, language trees or whatever, where it's like, okay, if I say this word, then the next word is this, and just
Yeah.
computing. Like, it's not magic. Like, it's an engineering phenomenon that took forever to come together. So while you can be optimistic about an AI agent replacing your wealth manager, it's going to take, again, probably billions of dollars and so many data points, it's unfathomable to create a wealth manager AI agent that doesn't make a stupid trading mistake. Because as soon as that happens, then people say, I'm no longer using this, and the technology is redundant.
Switching over to the advice for stakeholders, for the audience, what foundational steps should developers or investors take today to prepare for the tokenized real estate ecosystem in the future?
Yeah, it goes back to digitization. That's the first step here. And you have to understand what you're going to digitize, like what is worth putting online, what software do I have to use to handle that, and then what outcomes or what business cases am I looking for. All right, I can digitize my leases, and then what? Is it just store them? Is it because I'm looking for something to extract the income numbers from that and put it into a calculation for more accurate waterfalls? Like, why am I digitizing? So you need to put a little bit of thought into how and why you will enter the modern era. Now, let's say that you're an innovative firm, and you have a lot of stuff online, you have a data repository, your data lives somewhere, and you want to start to use it. You want to unlock the value of that data, right? Because properties have value, but the real value is made up of the information about those properties. This is when it was built, this is the repairs that were conducted, this is our financial projections, this is the comparables in the market. That's all data. So if we organize that data, and you might also hear the word structure, that's the more uh, data scientist word. We're going to structure the data. How do we start to monetize the value of that?
Mhm.
The best example I use is the appraisal process. And this is one of the things that building excels at, that instead of having subjectivity in your appraisal, or the appraisal process takes too long, or it's expensive, or there's gaps, and this leads to contingency or confusion or miscommunication, how can we make sure that you're getting the true value out of your property based off of all of this data backing up that value? I liken it to a Carfax. I think that's a really good example. You use Carfax. You say, well, here's my car. It drives, but here's everything about my car. And if there's a big gap when the transmission was replaced, or if it wasn't, and what the warranty on that is, if we don't know that, then in the back of my head, I'm thinking this car could blow up while I'm driving down the road because it's 100,000 miles past what a good transmission is supposed to be.
Mhm.
That's an issue. You make the same thing with a property, looking at large components like the HVAC, or what's the state of the roof. You want to have that data organized and ready so that you can make a defensible argument for the value of the property.
Mhm.
Then you might take it a step further. You say, well, if I have all this data, it's really easy to perform an appraisal. Could I perform appraisals more often? Could I start to price my property uh, every 24 months, every 12 months, every 6, every quarter, every month? How often could we do this? What happens if I create that price action? Well, I can see trends in my property. Maybe it's going up in value or it's performing really well. I think my investors would like that. They like the transparency. And if they want to exit their position, they're going to need some recent price data in order to find a buyer. Okay, so I can satisfy my investors by having up-to-date pricing of my asset. And it all starts with having data about the asset available. So there's many different business cases that come out of this. You have to decide what's best for you. And we list a few on our website. Maybe it's due diligence. You just want faster due diligence, or you're trying to appraise the property, or perhaps you're trying to be more compliant with your reporting. You have to organize information. It has to be verified, and then you have to send it off. With those who need to meet certain ESG metrics and requirements, you have to have that information ready, especially for certain certifications. So how do we organize that efficiently and present that to the right stakeholders? Now, for the stakeholders, I think you can start demanding more of your sponsors, of your property owners, and say, we want this information available to us. We want it to be verified. We want it to be up to date. We want to see more technology driving the property and the portfolio. I think we're in the modern age now, and we can set that expectations. We shouldn't have gaps in the information that's available to us. Things shouldn't be outdated. We shouldn't be suffering from illiquidity so much. We can demand a little bit more of our properties. And for the property developers who do rise to the occasion and become data-driven operators, they're going to attract more capital. They're going to have a better track record. Their properties are going to have better returns because it's going to be better valuations and more money saved. Potentially better liquidity, happier investors. I mean, there's just so many things so many benefits that can come out of this. This is often why we say what building is doing is, in many ways, creating a gold standard for real estate. Like if real estate was perfect, what would it look like? It would have transparency. It would have all this data. It would have technology infused throughout the building and throughout the portfolio. It would be more scalable. This is something to aspire to. And I think property owners and stakeholders can hold each other accountable and work towards that by adopting tools for digitization, maybe blockchain technology, certainly artificial intelligence.
Perfect. Well, I love that you guys are creating the gold standard for real estate. That is completely needed. And I just wanted to thank you again so much for your time and speaking to the NEO CRE audience to learn more about AI and blockchain in commercial real estate. Are there any other closing thoughts that you want to tell the audience?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share about what we're doing and to talk about some of the trends, the macro and micro trends happening in commercial real estate in the industry. It's an exciting time. You know, we've done really well, especially in the past few months. A lot of developers have been reaching out to us, trying to figure out how can they organize data, how can they use that data, and then maybe, if they want, how could they tokenize? So I encourage anyone to pick up the baton and see if they can elevate their real estate to the gold standard. And even if that's asking a lot, I think there's a lot of benefit that comes from these tools. We can help you save some money and just get you on the right path. So I certainly encourage any sort of outreach and that can be property owners, service providers, or anything or anyone in between. We embrace you with open arms.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody watching, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and please reach out to Matthew for any questions.